So when you think about hunting in the Brazilian Amazon, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For a lot of us, it seems like a simple story, but the reality of what we call bushmeat, wild animals used for food and trade, is way more complex. It's this incredible mix of culture, survival, and conservation. Today, we're going to unpack a whole decade of data to see what's really going on. And just so you know, everything we're about to explore is grounded in a single, super comprehensive piece of research. It's a scientific review that was published in late 2023. This study pulls together 10 years of data to give us the clearest picture we've ever had. You know, the researchers basically asked one massive question. After 10 years of studies, what do we really know about bushmeat in Brazil? And the answers they found, well, some of them are what you might expect, but others are genuinely surprising. So to get to those answers, here's our game plan. We'll start with how they even got all this data. Then we'll look at where in Brazil this is all happening. And then we'll get to the real heart of it, the huge difference between hunting for food and hunting for trade. After that, we'll follow the supply chain and wrap up by looking at what this all means for conservation. Okay, so first things first, how do you even begin to study something that's often informal and in a lot of places illegal? Well, the researchers basically became detectives, following the clues left behind in the scientific literature. They used a really powerful tool called a systematic review. So instead of doing one new study, they gathered all the important studies that have already been published. You can think of it like a massive investigation of the investigations, pulling all the evidence together to see the big picture. And the scale of this was just huge. Their first search brought back over 7,500 results. After a really rigorous process of filtering everything out, getting rid of duplicates, irrelevant studies, they were left with a core set of 63 articles published over 10 years. This is the foundation for everything we're about to talk about. So with all that evidence collected, the first step was to map it out. Where in this enormous country is most of the research on bushmeat actually happening? And this chart just lays it out so clearly. You can see this research is overwhelmingly focused on two areas: the Northeast region, with 36 studies, and the North region, which is home to the Amazon, with 26. But look at this! Almost no data from the Southeast, South, or Central West parts of the country. That tells us right away that our picture, while it's detailed, is also very specific to certain locations. And if we look at it by biome, the story gets even sharper. The vast majority of the data comes from just two of Brazil's major ecosystems, the Caatinga, which is this really unique tropical dry forest, and of course the Amazon rainforest. This is super important context. We're mostly looking at patterns inside these specific environments. Okay, now we get to the absolute core of the research, and this is where it gets fascinating. The study made this critical distinction between animals hunted for personal consumption, to feed your family, and animals hunted for commercial trade. It's the difference between the menu and the market. And believe me, this distinction is everything. On one side, you have subsistence hunting. On the other, it's a business. And what the researchers found is that the animals targeted in each category are surprisingly different. What people put on their own dinner table isn't necessarily what they're selling downtown. So let's look at consumption first. When it comes to hunting for your own family's food, what's the most common target? It is probably not what you'd guess. It's birds. Yeah, birds. They make up over half of all the species people mentioned. Birds are the #1 target for subsistence hunting, followed by mammals. But now, watch what happens when money gets involved. For the commercial bushmeat trade, the picture just flips. It's the large mammals that dominate, making up more than half the market. We're talking animals like peccaries, capybaras, and armadillos. They're targeted because they're bigger and worth more money. Birds and reptiles are still in the mix, but mammals are the main event. The researchers themselves really spell out why this matters. They say, and I'm quoting here, "These data reinforce that birds and mammals have been the groups most used, and it is necessary to mitigate the hunting exploitation of these groups." Just knowing the difference between what's eaten and what's sold is a huge insight for any conservation work. So we know what's being hunted and for what purpose. But that's only half the story, right? The next question is, why is this happening? And how does the meat actually get from the forest to the consumer? This is the human element. And there's no single easy answer. The study found this whole complex web of reasons. Of course, there are socioeconomic factors, like poverty, but there are also biological factors, like what animals are even available to hunt. And you can't forget about culture. Things like just preferring the taste of wild meat, or traditions that go back generations. For the meat that ends up on the commercial market, it goes through what the study calls a dynamic and ramified chain. It starts with the hunters, then it moves to intermediaries who use things like motorcycles or boats to get it to towns. Then it goes to sellers in markets or restaurants, and finally, it reaches the customers in the city. And the market itself is incredibly varied. You can find the meat sold fresh, frozen, salted, smoked, you name it. It's available in public markets, at informal street fairs, and sometimes even directly from a hunter's home. It might end up on a restaurant menu or get sold to people living in the city, and sometimes even tourists. All of this brings us to the final and maybe the most urgent piece of this whole puzzle. What does this decade of data really mean for the future of Brazil's incredible biodiversity? Okay, so here's the number that really hits home. Across all 63 of those studies, the researchers found that 41 different species being hunted for food or for sale are officially listed as being under some category of threat. 41. And let's break that down for a second. That number includes 29 species that are considered vulnerable, 10 that are endangered, and 2 that are critically endangered. We're talking about a ladder of escalating risk here, from a high risk of extinction in the wild to a very high risk to an extremely high risk. And the pressure is especially intense on large birds and on so many different species of primates. This isn't just a local problem. The hunting pressure they found in these studies is happening to species that are already in decline all over the world. This research basically confirms that hunting for bushmeat is a major factor, right alongside habitat loss that's pushing many of these animals closer and closer to the edge. And that leaves us right here, at a true crossroads. This decade of data doesn't give us any easy answers, but it clarifies the central problem with amazing precision. How do we create policies that actually address the real-world needs of people who depend on this resource, while at the same time making sure Brazil's irreplaceable wildlife survives for generations to come? That is the massive question this research leaves us with.